Hey, this is Pete from Ishmael Ensemble. We're here in my studio in Bristol and we're going for a track, The River, featuring Yazz Ahmed from our debut album, A State of Flow. So yeah, I guess this track really came about after our keys player returned from a trip to India, where he basically took his little Zoom recorder mic and spent an afternoon on the Ganges at Varanasi and came back with these amazing field recordings. So you got the kind of boat oars going past and noises of what's happening on the shore. And then the way he put it was just this kind of procession boat started coming past with these amazing bits of percussion. And yeah, that kind of became a goldmine of loops to start playing around with. So we basically chopped it up, tried to make it vaguely in time without losing too much of its human element. You can kind of see, there it is in effect. There's that big gong that comes in that we kind of put at the start of a little phrase. And yeah, the combination of that and the kind of oars that we had earlier. So yeah, that basically became the bed to start from. Now I always try and start tunes with as much noise and bed going on as possible. So these are some percussion bits that I recorded with my friend Jackson, and yeah, we just spent a day in his rehearsal space and he has all kinds of weird and wonderful bits of noise making stuff from around the world. So I kind of always throw these in just to give the track a bit of texture and mainly to keep myself interested from the get-go, because often those early stages of writing a tune you get bored with a loop before you even get going. So yeah, as much kind of off the grid stuff as possible is always good. I think I found this little horn drone. It's from a Korg M1 but pitched right down and made a loop out of. So before we'd even written any kind of melody or structure, we had this whole bed of noises and the Zoom recordings there. So yeah, basically I started playing around with that percussion loop and adding just some simple kind of groove and rhythm to it. So those perk bits are Jackson again, just recorded a whole load of congas and stuff with him. So this was enough really to get going on building whatever we wanted out of the melody or rhythm. So yeah, then I spent an afternoon over at Jake, our keys and synth player's house, and got to deciding on a melody and kind of chord structure for this, which I think we ended up using a book over here. So yeah, I got this book a while ago, Musical Scales of the World, and it's just a really good reference for when you're stuck in the kind of monotonous same old scales and comfort zone, I guess. It's really helpful just to give you a new fresh take on where you're going, and just limiting yourself to a 5 or 6 note sequence that you wouldn't normally play. That's, I guess, the process of coming up with stuff that sounds interesting to you and you don't get bored of immediately. So yeah, Jake and I spent the afternoon just playing around with some different chords and scales and decided upon this thing which got a nice little semitone hop between the F and F sharp, and yeah, it kind of sounded like this. And from there we just built the chord sequence and yeah, got to work. And added some chords. And yeah, basically we got to the point where we'd already been considering doing some collaborations for the album, and we'd both been a massive fan of this trumpet player called Yazz Ahmed, and it was a kind of chance meeting with a friend of mine who had been working on the management behind her last album, and yeah, she was appearing at the Bristol Jazz and Blues Festival, so I got my friend Charlie to hook us up and invited her over to lay down some parts. So yeah, it was kind of a bit of a dream come true for us that we got to get in touch and collaborate on this. And yeah, so we added her to the mix and she added her part. I think tonally for us it was really exciting just because it added this new dimension that we hadn't explored yet. The saxophone on all our records, to have that other horn sound just really just brings it out in the mix as well. So that basically became the core element of the track, and then it was just up to me to really build it out from there. Now it kind of had that tension from the get-go, that percussion loop really almost deserves a big break. So I got stuck into some drums I'd recorded with our drummer Rory, and basically the process for me with the drums is I spend a day or two just recording drums and almost building a sample pack of my own recordings that I can dip in and out of. And yeah, it was actually this 7/8 groove that I'd recorded with Rory. I'll try and expand on that a bit. So this is the original drum beat that I had recorded. And I basically chopped that up and made this whole new groove out of it. So yeah, it's a really interesting process for us because obviously Rory's recorded these parts thinking they're going to end up as one tune, and then I come back to him saying, oh, this is the finished song. And sometimes it turns out that they're almost unplayable on a real drum kit, but that's the challenge for him, I guess, when we get to rehearsals. So yeah, I kind of wanted the drums to really jump out and have that big clattering sound you'll hear in the mix. A kind of quite wide, stereo-wise. Yeah, I always tend to have a parallel compression channel. I think I call it the New York style. So yeah, the simple clean mix, and then parallel to that, you've got this kind of heavy, distorted, reverberating compressed mix, which I run parallel, which kind of not so interested in the highs in that. It's just making a bit of a clattery middle to it. And yeah, I just always use the standard Logic 9 plugins really. The Space Designer Reverb's really good. You can basically load your own impulse responses into it. So I managed to get some off a friend that sounded really good. And yeah, this is that soloed. Always kind of like to add a bit of girth to it with a just simple distortion again. Again, these are all just stuff inside Logic 9. Quite a heavy compressor there. That's the kind of thing that doesn't sound great on its own, but in the mix with those brighter highs, I don't know, it just seems to give it a bit more depth. Then you kind of add the percussion in there. It's got a nice wide stereo image of drums. So yeah, that really kind of erupts out of nowhere in the composition. So I'll just play the lead into that. It's got this quite chuggy, almost minimal techno kind of vibe going on, and I really wanted it to just expand into this really wide, out of nowhere mix. It's quite a nice contrast there. There's a lot of synthetic drums in that beginning bit, you know, just a very simple kick. I've kind of got these banks and banks of different samples I've collected over the years. Don't know where that came from. This is like a heavily processed little drum loop of Rory again. So what I'll often do is just take a mix down of some drums I've recorded elsewhere and yeah, just like add loads of stuff to it. It's got some like Leslie organ vibrato on it. Just have fun with it really, and try and create something texturally that's interesting. So yeah, we basically had our simple arrangement with this big build up and then emphatic drop. Got this little break where all the kind of sounds are coming together and the drums are in there, and we return to the main theme. So yeah, at this point where we had the arrangement, it was basically the drums were sorted, the percussion at the beginning and the loops from Varanasi and the riff were all in there, and that's when we recorded with Yazz. And then from there it is really just the textural stuff around it, which yeah, a lot of that kind of stage is all just done here and with a few bits of kit. So this thing, Yamaha CP, it's from a series called Reface that I think they did 3 or 4 keyboards, did like a DX7 synthy one. This is the electric piano version, and it's just great for building little beds of sound. It's got this kind of endless delay function. We can basically build loops within the keyboard and then mess with the delay a bit. And this is a pretty core part of the live show, and pretty much all the recordings. It's a really quick fix to fill out those sonic areas that need a bit of ambience going on, or just something interesting texturally. And I think in this, it's basically the intro to the tune you can hear. So then that becomes a bit of an endless loop that creates the bed of the track for the intro. And that was just literally done on this with that simple setting I was playing earlier. Kind of build these really haunting, where you almost lose their note center. Almost treat that delay wheel like I'm DJing, trying to keep it in time with the track. So you can just literally play with the delay time. It's a bit slow. I think it's really crucial, both in the recording setting and the live performance, to have those elements that aren't perfectly synced. As soon as you've got everything locked to a clock, it just suddenly sounds like something made solely on a laptop. So for us, in this process of trying to create a fuller band sound, technically within the same process that I used to write more kind of dance music in, it's elements like this that really set it apart from just being restricted to a MIDI clock or a strict metronome. So yeah, another simple trick I use for kind of creating a bed of noise is these two. This is a WEM copycat tape delay that I actually got in a house clearance for 100 quid. I think they're like 300 quid on eBay. Which is just really nice. I just run it as a send return on the desk before it goes into the computer. And again, it's about having that variety of timings that aren't locked to what's going on in the computer. So all of this happens before it reaches the record button in there. So if I build up a bit more of this, so with the delay depth on there at full, that's just going to run forever. And I can basically set this up as a send, and I've got that running as a send channel on here, so I can record it independently anyway. So you kind of get this double delay. So yeah, I'm constantly riding that breaking point where it kind of almost loses its shit, and then you can bring it back and just get those nice tail offs. And I also do something that I think a lot of people would frown at, where you can just sort of move the jog wheel and you get those warbling delays. I don't know, it's just little bits of texture that you can add that are human, and I can never do that again, basically. And there's a nice part of that in the track where it just reaches that breaking point just before the drop, and I think stuff like that that's unique, that you can't really recreate, or at least not very successfully. Maybe even just as a writer makes it exciting, because I know that was one of those happy moments that I'll never be able to do again. And you kind of get good at trying never to recreate that and just letting it be. So yeah, one of those moments is, that's basically what I was just doing there. And then with these 2 delays, you get that ping-pongy thing basically. Which on its own is just messing about, but in the mix that basically, for me anyway, creates the bridge between the 2 sections. So going back to that thing of it being slightly out of time and riding the wheel on there. So it's like one little bit where I catch the timing perfectly and then it completely goes out of sync, but I've kind of kept it in. So it's in there. Then I'll nudge it and it loses it. And then finds it again and then loses it. Yeah, I just find stuff like that really exciting to do in the studio, because that's just fun to play with and becomes its own sort of sound. You know, I never really play this keyboard to play melodies or notes. It's always just to make that. And if I need to get out of it for whatever reason, just... And yeah, for performance as well, it's a really fun little toy that no one ever quite knows whether it's me doing it or the guitarist or the synth. You know, it's yeah, its own beast. So yeah, another element in there that I use a lot in the studio is the Novation bass station, which I very rarely use for bass. Actually, our keys player has a Moog Mini Tour, which just sounds a lot fatter than this. So yeah, we usually rely on that for bass sounds. But this has a really nice little latch function where you can basically build arpeggiators. And again, I'll just run that as a send through the desk, through the copycat. So I'm losing the dry signal here. Now that's just the signal running through the tape. Finding that sweet spot. Giving it a little movement. And I find, you know, just running stuff through one piece of kit means there's a cohesive nature to the mix. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're running a snare channel or a keyboard or a synth. They're, in their own right, you know, very different frequencies and sound sources, but because it's all running through that same sound, you end up with a real nice meshing of all the elements. And yeah, I used to just get obsessed with VSTs and spend hours going through different delays, different versions of basically the same thing. But just having that set up, ready to go, I guess is part of that process of finding a unique voice or whatever in the way the tracks sound by this sort of part of the process where we're just basically adding loads of ingredients to see what sticks and binds the whole mix. Because, you know, our process, it's not all recorded in the same room. The drums aren't recorded for the part for this piece of music, so having those consistencies in the mix with effects really helps to bring a whole record together, I find, which is probably why I managed to make all these different sound sources work, because I'm basically using 3 bits of kit in the studio to make it a finished product. So yeah, we can hear that up in the mix in the actual track. It kind of comes in towards the end. So after that second round of the melody, see this track here kind of starts to creep in. Basically exactly the same sound that I just got on there. I kind of play with the panning so it starts to move around the room, you can see here. Just those simple bits of movement really excite your ears when you're listening to something. I think I've got to a point where most of the music I listen to is on headphones now as a listener to other people's music. So I think I've started doing a lot more panning and messing around with quite big angles in the mix, because you really notice it in headphones. You know, if you've got arguably quite a boring synth line, you know, it's just 3 notes going round and round. But when it starts to shift without you really noticing, it just excites me as a listener, so kind of why not put that in there. So yeah, another big part of the textural stuff I try and get in there is run through this. I lived in Berlin for a couple of years ago, and got to know these guys, Emmanuel and Alfie, that made music pretty much solely on this console. It's just like a four track cassette recorder basically, but it's got some quite nice old preamps, and yeah, you just get a unique sound on it. And yeah, I came back from Berlin really excited and telling the guys in the band about it, and our guitarist Mullins just said, "Oh yeah, I've got one of them." I was like, "What?" I thought I discovered this amazing new toy, but he'd been playing with it for years. So often what I do is just record parts either out of the laptop or straight in. So in this case, there's some saxophone that I've recorded to the cassette. And then you can basically just mess around with the pitch wheel. You can play it back at half speed, or yeah, there's a whole variety of different ways of playing it back, where you can just create these big, lush beds of noise. So let's get that rolling. So that's me just playing a little phrase on the sax. But then you can basically mess about with the pitch. And you can roll it at half speed. You can run that back through the tape delay as well. So that's the normal playback. And it's just another fun toy to make some different beds of sound out of, really. So yeah, the combination of that, the other two keyboards, and our guitarist, yeah, just managed to create different tones all around the same sort of frequencies to just mesh everything together, and it'll appear just really subtly under the whole mix. So here's a guitar part that I played through that. So it's all kind of pitched down. And yeah, again, very subtle, but something that appears throughout my music as just another layer of texture that doesn't quite sound right. So the final parts of the mix are really just touches we added on top after I'd got everything to that point, and the texture and the arrangement were all sounding good. Now Jake, the keys player, and myself both work for a tree surgeon out in Somerset, and it just so happens his neighbour is this phenomenal musician and yeah, player of all things, by the name of Ross Hughes, and we kind of heard that he had all this cave full of instruments and had to sort of jump on him to get him to lay down some woodwind parts. So he plays bass clarinet, and it just added this amazing part. I actually recorded it through a tube preamp. It just gives it this extra bit of depth. So it kind of tails out there, it's just in for that one last round of the riff. But in the mix it just bulks up that bottom end. And he also suggested laying down some alto flute at the beginning, so he kind of mirrors Yazz Ahmed's solo at the beginning, but it's just this beautiful haunting sound. So there's Yazz coming in, and he kind of plays the mirror image underneath. It's very subtle in the mix, you can't really hear it, but it just adds a bit of depth and it almost becomes a delay of the horn that Yazz is playing. Now the other noise that you can hear starting in there is Jake's modular synth. So this kind of pulsating bass thing that basically signals the start of the sort of kick and shakers coming in. So that really locks in the groove that the percussion starts to build on. It's just a little loop of this take. So again, in much the same way as we do the drums, Jake will just record a whole load of different parts on the modular synth and send them over, to which I sort of chop up and make part of the arrangement. There's another interesting thing here that he did. So this is the sound of something bouncing on a string of a sarod, which is an Indian string instrument, but processed through his modular setup. So it's quite an interesting sound source that then comes back later in the mix as the actual raw sarod, which he plays as well, that basically mirrors the main riff. So there are a lot of elements effectively playing the same thing, but I think they're so unique in their timbre that they all just mesh together really nicely. So EQ wise, I kind of keep it quite simple, as you know, just a bit of boosting on the sub there. And the drums, I always used to have a habit of just, you know, spiking through everything and taking anything out that was too resonant, whereas now I almost do the opposite of finding a bit that sounds good to me and really just boosting it as much as possible, you know. Just giving stuff a bit more character. Yeah, I find if you try and take out too many bad frequencies, you end up with quite a thin mix overall. So I try not to limit everything. It's tricky with the horns because you get a lot of these kind of breathy tones. But again, if I'm dipping stuff out, it's quite mild. So you can see here I've got a real big kind of breathy peak between 5 and 10k. Then you do often get quite a lot of nasty frequencies around here, but for me part of that is the character behind the horn, so I try to keep them as natural as possible. Again, I just use this same space designer for, you know, pretty simple presets put in. I just find it works, and I've been using Logic 9 well for as long as it came out, whenever that was. I guess I got this laptop 2011, 2012. So yeah, basically not changed my process. It's only the Outboard gear that I've really gotten to grips with and experimented outside of the box. I'm really not interested in staring at the computer for hours, so hence the bright colours, and anything to make that part more entertaining is worth it. This has been Pete from Ishmael Ensemble for Future Music, and we've been going for a track from our debut album, A State of Flow, which is out now.